All right, let's welcome back the veteran political opinion writer for The Hill. Brent Budowsky is still here. We are also joined now by the political commentator at ReaganReports.com. Michael Reagan joins us. Michael, good to talk to you this evening. Welcome into the fray, if you will. Let me start you right out here with, I think, what has become almost the theme of the night here. There are people who believe that despite the fact that just because you win New Hampshire doesn't mean you always become president, that, let's face it, Donald Trump is inevitable. Now, we haven't had that word used, Michael, but a lot of people seem to be leaning that way, that he is inevitable as the GOP candidate. What say you?
Well, New Hampshire has been picking the Republican candidates for a long time when you really look at how they vote. Now, the Democrats, they don't. But I was thinking about earlier when I was tweeting at my Reagan World Twitter account, and I tweeted this. You take 109 at 106, and you only come out with 16. I don't know why you'd be happy about that. I'm talking about John Kasich, who got 16% of the vote, but he spent 109 days in New Hampshire, had 106 town hall meetings, and you look at Trump, who was there 32 days, had a couple of meetings, and then still just absolutely double-digited everybody in the room. I'm telling you, that you've got to find the person who is going to lead and go up against Trump. You can't have now 4 or 5 other people splitting their own votes and going against Trump. They got to find their hero, their leader, and put that person against Donald Trump as they go forward. But of course, they won't do that because why? You've got Florida. You have a primary there where it's the delegates go to the winner. You have Ohio, where the primary there, the delegates go to the winner. So you're going to keep Kasich around, and you're going to keep the Floridians around because they will then have power if they have all of the delegates from their respective states as they go into a convention next summer.
Michael, I tell you what, I'm going to play devil's advocate with you here for just a moment. One of my favorite games. But let's talk about Donald Trump and the fact that he only spent a few days, if you will, relatively speaking, to a lot of the other candidates. He doesn't need to, Michael. Donald Trump calls every network news show every single morning. He calls them at night. He calls them in the afternoon. He is on every single show. Everybody can hear him 24/7. He is a master at using the media. The other candidates are not. They don't draw. The media doesn't draw them in. They don't spend that time. You don't hear anybody breaking into a network newscast and going, let me stop for just a moment. John Kasich's on the phone. Donald Trump is on the phone. They want to talk to him because the people demand it. He's giving them what they want, and so is the media. They're helping him.
But the reality is he's always drawn the media. Before he was in politics, he's always drawn the media because he is Donald Trump. And he lives in New York in the Trump Towers, and he can call any show anytime. He's been calling all the shows all the time since he was born, and he knows that. So you've got a reality show person who understands the media, and you've got politicians who only understand politics. And I've said this for a long time. Somebody asked one time, what did George Bush need when he was in the White House? I said he needed a Michael K. Deaver, someone who really understood the media. None of these politicians running against Donald Trump have any idea about the media. And that's part of their problem. And none of them will listen because that's what politicians don't do, is they don't listen.
Brent, let me change this up a little bit here, and let's talk about something else here, because Michael brought this up a little bit and touched on this. The American people, when it comes down to Donald Trump and others, they don't want to understand politics. They don't want to understand what goes on inside the Beltway. They don't need to know what happens at every single vote because they're sick and dog-tired of getting beat up, getting overtaxed, getting run into the ground. All they want to hear is somebody tell us, I'll fix it, I'll take care of it, I don't care what it takes, hell be damned, and I'll just make sure that it gets pushed through. That's what makes it work. It is the new paradigm in the American public. They don't care about Washington.
But the bottom line, you're right, they don't care about Washington. But the bottom line is, if their guy, who seems to be Donald Trump, gets elected and finds out running a business is not the same as running the government, there's a lot of people out there that may wake up one morning and say, what the hell just happened?
Okay. Now, let me start there. Brent, let me come to you on this one here, and let me get you to talk about that as well. And there's the next thing here. Donald Trump is getting the populist vote right now. They love him. But then let's get down to the governing issue right here. Brent, you've been around Washington politics a long time here. You know how this machine works. If Donald Trump becomes president of the United States, one way or another, he's going to have to work inside that machine. How then does he get to work with people, many of whom don't like him in the first place?
Well, yeah, let's remember that in the general election polling, both Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton beat Donald Trump in most polls by very big margins. So the fact that the media worships him doesn't mean that the American people want to make him their president. Governing is important, and I'll tell you, while I have Michael Reagan on here, I want to say one brief thing. I began working for Democratic leaders in the House when Tip O'Neill was Speaker for the next few, when Ronald Reagan was president. On the matter of governing, Ronald Reagan knew how to govern, and Nancy Reagan, Michael's mother and his beloved wife, did more for humanity, Nancy Reagan did as First Lady, that people will never know in controlling nuclear weapons, dealing with Gorbachev, giving Ronald Reagan sound advice, and at times talking to Gorbachev. Every man and woman on earth owes Nancy Reagan a tremendous debt of gratitude and thanks, which I convey to Michael right now for what she did to help President Reagan change the world when he was in office. He knew about governing, to answer your question. Donald Trump doesn't.
All right. So then let's deal with it this way. Donald Trump gets the nomination, Brent. He goes to Washington then. What has he, and again, what we're talking here is pretty much behind the scenes action here. What has he got to learn? And what has he got to do then in order to become a president and start working with Republicans, Democrats across the aisle and getting things done, so we don't continue to have this logjam that we've had for 8 years where nothing gets done because nobody seems to want to take any chances?
Well, he has to learn that you don't bully your opponents, because many of them are big. And in Washington, they're tough. Whether they're good, bad, or indifferent, they're tough. And they've been here a lot longer than he'll ever know. So you have to have respect. Something that Ronald Reagan had for his opponents, something that President Kennedy had for his opponents, and work with them in ways that Donald Trump has never given a shred of evidence that he is willing to do or knows how to do. You have to learn. He has to learn. Politics is not war. That is absolute nonsense. Maybe that's why Vladimir Putin admires him so much. Maybe that's why he respects Vladimir Putin so much. But Kennedy and Reagan and Roosevelt and Eisenhower and the presidents who really did things in their days, you have to work with people you disagree with. You have to reach agreements. You can't just insult people, berate people, call them names, and say you're at war with them. This town will eat up good people. It'll kill bullies politically, and Trump has to learn that. And he doesn't have the attitude. I don't think he's going to be nominated, by the way, but whatever that is, he has to learn how to work with people and not treat people as enemies and call people names and insult everybody he disagrees with.
Michael, does Donald Trump need to learn that, or can he basically get it done simply on his strength of will and the fact that he refuses to back down?
Yeah, well, he's got to win 50 states in a general election to have the members of Congress actually listen to him at the end game. He's got to have such an overwhelming victory that will happen. But the reality of it is, and even my father today, and I've said this, I say this in speeches to Republican groups all the time, in agreement with me, that today, in the world we live in, Ronald Reagan may not even win the nomination of the Republican Party, and John F. Kennedy may not win the nomination of the Democrat Party. Reagan would be too liberal. Kennedy would be too conservative. I mean, think about the Republican Party today, and think about those of us in the media. What would we say about a governor coming out of California who has raised taxes, signed an abortion bill, no-fault divorce, and, my God, was a union leader? We would think of him as a rhino, but yet we think of Ronald Reagan as the greatest president in our lifetime. We in the radio business, and I was in it for 26 years, don't give anybody credit for anything they've done because it doesn't make the phones ring. What makes the phones ring is being against everything they, in fact, are doing. And so if we want to change in America, we have to change in many, many ways. I remember talking to a member of Congress about immigration, and they looked at me and said, "That is a great idea. What do you think Laura Ingraham will say about it?" I mean, that's how they think on Capitol Hill. Talk radio and the media is absolutely controlling the agenda in Washington, D.C.
Okay, so then let me ask you, and knowing that you're right in so many ways, Kasich 16%, Cruz 12%, Bush 11%, Rubio 11%, with 75% of the precincts in right now. All right, Michael, I ask you with your experience and knowing Washington, these guys have got to make the phones ring. They have got to get people out. They have got to find a way to see if they can defeat Donald Trump come hell, high water, whatever you want. In your opinion, briefly, what do these four, Kasich, Cruz, Bush, and Rubio, need to do? People watching right now who are supporters, who want to know what their guy needs to do in order to defeat Donald Trump. You got 60 seconds.
Get the egos out of the way and think about America and find which person you're going to ride. Think of the Kentucky Derby, which horse you're going to be on, and ride that horse. Otherwise, like you see tonight, they're going to keep splitting the vote. And Donald Trump, who's in one lane, and all the others who are in another lane, guess what? Donald Trump wins by default because he's splitting the votes with no one.
30 seconds, and Brent, do you agree with this?
Totally. I completely agree with what Michael just said. The Republicans who were running for that Plan C mantle, other than Cruz, other than Trump, they have to pick a champion. It's going to take a degree of statesmanship. It's going to take a degree of being elevated. The thing to watch, Chris Christie will be out by this time tomorrow, in my opinion, or shortly thereafter. He has no option to stay in. Will he endorse somebody? If he does, I predict it won't be Rubio. But if it's Bush or Kasich, that candidate will get a big lift, and at some point, one of them will be the alternative sooner or later. There will then be a grand battle for the nomination between that candidate and the last standing of Cruz or Trump. That's how I call it. I don't know when, but it's going to happen. But they have to rise above themselves and their egos.
I love the whole grand battle. I got to tell you, gentlemen, there it is. If that could ever possibly talk about what we're facing now as we head towards November, Super Tuesday, and all the rest as we come up, a grand battle fits perfectly. Brent Budowsky, always a pleasure. Michael Reagan, always a pleasure as well. Thank you so much for joining us, gentlemen. We will talk to you again real soon. So it is Trump, it is Sanders, it is Christie likely going home tomorrow. The fallout has just begun. Stay with us. Newsmax continues our coverage of the New Hampshire primary.